Tony Messenger is the editorial page editor. Jane Duker is the former chief of staff to Governor Holden. And in Washington, D.C. is Majority Leader of the House of Representatives, John Diehl. John Diehl, we'll give this next one to you. Your governor, Jay Nixon, vetoed the tax bill that you and many of your colleagues called the defining legislation of this past session. He vetoed it. What are your thoughts?
Well, I mean, I think he's starting to show his true colors as a big spender and a big taxer. I mean, what this tax bill was really very simple. If and when revenues increase in the state over where they are right now, a portion or a good portion of those revenues are going to be given back to the taxpayers who pay taxes. And it's a pretty simple equation, and I liken it to, if there's $500 sitting on the table, is that $500 extra dollars into the economy and into the state's economy? Is the decision to spend that money best left with government bureaucrats, or is the decision to spend that money best left with the small business owners and the taxpayers who earned those dollars? I think the answer is simple. Give it back to the small business owners, give it back to the taxpayers who earn the dollars, and let them reinvest it into their businesses to grow the economy.
John
I think we're going to make an attempt to override
it. Do you think you have the votes to override this?
Well, I mean, right now I think it's going to be close. I've been through two veto overrides. One was on the congressional maps, and one was on another healthcare issue bill at the veto session last year. Veto overrides are very difficult to do. They're dicey. We're at 109 members right now, so if one person is sick or can't make it or is out of the room, it might not happen, but I can guarantee you if we cannot override the veto in September, he's going to get it back on his desk early next year, where we can override the veto during session.
Tony Messenger, what are your thoughts?
First of all, there's no way they override the veto. In part, they just lost one vote for it in electing Jason Smith to Congress. Secondly, they didn't have an override number when they passed it in the House to begin with. And thirdly, now that the governor has pointed out that there's a hidden tax increase for seniors on prescription drugs in the bill that was a mistake, no matter whose mistake it is, no House Republican is now going to vote for what is clearly identified to voters as a tax increase on seniors in that bill. There's no way it gets overridden. But let me just hit the Majority Leader's analysis real quick, because unfortunately, if he hasn't read it yet, he needs to read the governor's veto message. The governor issued the most detailed, the most well-argued, the most passionate veto message I've ever read. I'm proud of the governor. Jane Duker and I have both been critical of this governor for not being very bold. This was a bold veto, and he explained very clearly that the analysis as it relates to these triggers that supposedly don't kick in until the revenue kicks in, that's not the way the bill is written on some of the key tax cuts. The wealthy get tax cuts no matter what. The state loses revenue, schools lose revenue, no matter what in certain portions of these bill. It's only some parts of the bill that are triggered. So these cuts were going to hurt education, they were going to hurt roads, they were going to take money away from a state that is just now recovering and starting to show some economic increase. It was a bad bill. The governor made the strongest step he's made as governor in vetoing this bill.
Well, I want to get to Jane Duker, but first we'll go to John Diehl. John?
Sure. No, I mean, first of all, I appreciate Tony's analysis on what the Republican General Assembly is going to do. Number one, the vote on the underlying bill does not determine what happens on a veto override. And I would point Tony to the most significant bill that we overrode the governor on. That was the congressional maps. We had far less than what was required for a veto override on that bill. I think the vote, when we sent the bill to the governor in the House, was in the 90s, and yet we overrode that veto. Number two, the points that he made about the trigger, I disagree with him. And I think that's the governor's interpretation to find excuses to veto the bill. The simple question is if there's extra money, should that money go back to the taxpayers, or should it go to fund more government programs? And
Like
I think
schools.
we'll get there.
Is
Like
there,
schools.
Wait a minute.
Hold on, wait. Is there
fund the schools now?
Wait a
is there a hidden tax on prescription drugs for seniors in this bill?
It's not hidden.
You addressing that to me or Jane? I'm sorry.
You, John. Is there a tax on?
I've been told that the language we got from Nixon's Department of Revenue may or may not do that, and that may determine whether or not we override this veto or whether we fix it in January and send it right back to his desk. Okay, and that's part of the analysis. We're going through the language that's there is language that we got from Nixon's Department of Revenue.
Do you guys read that language, John?
Well, of course we read it, but we also have to rely on analysts from the departments, Tony. You know better than that.
Well, but this is the problem I have with that. Nixon gets excoriated for saying, hey, wait a minute, I'm not sure what a bureaucrat did here or there, and you all say you're responsible, it's your department. That goes both ways. I'm really perturbed with people blaming, state employees because legislators don't read bills. So,
Well,
I mean,
of course we. Okay, but
we
read bills.
I know, but I think this whole, I hate bureaucrat blaming on both sides because,
Well, I don't
everybody is
disagree with
responsible.
that. But we have a significant amount of money in our budget, okay, that we provide to each department to provide legislative liaisons from that department to the General Assembly to help us with these very, very type of issues.
And we have legislative research that's also funded by the
I don't
taxpayer.
disagree with that.
Right.
Okay, so if there was a mistake, that mistake needs to be corrected.
Right.
But that's an excuse to avoid the real issue on the underlying bill.
Oh, no, he didn't use that excuse.
Well, I understand he did it.
Right.
The question is whether or not we override it or whether we do it again in January.
And this is the other problem I have with this. This idea that we're going to talk about taxes and there's going to be triggers as to whether money goes back. To me, it's just a big avoidance policy. This is the deal. Every year, you all get revenue. There's a consensus revenue out there, and you decide what programs you're going to fund and not fund. So rather than doing that sort of on the record, you're going to, do cuts. And I prefer, for transparency, that the legislature take the revenue that's given every year, that's raised every year, and determine each year what programs are going to be funded and when. But this idea that we have, Hancock is one of the worst things that ever happened to this state, where, revenue flow is completely taken out of the hands of both the legislature and the governor. And it's terrible public policy, and this just doubles down on it. So if the legislature wants to fund a program or not fund a program, they ought to do it transparent and just say, we may save money, we may not save money, or we're going to give a tax refund this year or whatever it is. But they don't. I mean, to me, this is all hidden. If you guys want to constrict government, then do it. But do it online.
And that's what we're trying to do.
Right. You're taking revenue off the table. But not really, only if there's a trigger.
I mean, there's an old joke around the General Assembly. Okay, what's the most dangerous place in the building? Okay, that's between the school administrator and $1 on the table. Okay, there's never, in my 5 years up there, I have never heard of any bureaucrat coming back, or maybe I shouldn't use a bureaucrat, but any government employee, staffer, administration, budget person on the administration side come back to us and say, we need less money than we had the year
You
before.
are the appropriators. This is the problem I have with this whole analysis.
So we're taking the extra money we have. Okay, if there's money coming in over what we appropriated and what the revenue is now, we're going to turn around and we're going to give it back to the businesses that created that dollar.
Except for that's not what it does, because
Right.
this is future. This is you are binding a future legislature for not having enough money for schools after you guys are already gone because of term limits.
They have the money we have right now.
And this is the thing, blaming bureaucrats and school administrators for appropriation decisions that are made by the Missouri legislature.
Okay, so this is an
ridiculous.
appropriation decision. We are deciding to give the money back.
That's State Representative John Deal, Majority House Leader. Jane Dukers here, former Chief of Staff of Governor Holden, and editorial page editor Tony Messenger. The board meeting continues with Julius Hunter and Larry Connors and that tiff. What happened there? We'll talk about that and dissect that next on KTR.